morning or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this CMCC webinar series on urban adaptation. My name is Elisa Calliari. I'm a researcher at the Risk Assessment and Adaptation Strategies Division at CMCC and a research fellow at University College London. And it's really a great pleasure for me to introduce and to moderate this webinar today, where we will discuss about the importance of understanding and measuring climate risk in order to manage it, and also to support cities in the transition towards a climate resilient and sustainable future. And we will do so with an excellent speaker, Catherine Higham, who is the regional manager for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa on CDP's City, States and Regions team. I'm sure many of you know CDP already, but for those who don't, let me just remind you that this is a non-profit organization that helps investors, companies, cities, regions, and states to assess their environmental impact and to take action to build a sustainable economy. Before handing it over to you, Catherine, I just would like to say a couple of words about what we do at CMCC, the organizer for this webinar. CMCC is a non-profit research organization that was established in 2005, and we became a foundation in 2015. And we study climate change at 300, well, in all its dimension, I would say. So climate change and its interaction with the environment, society, business, and policymakers. We are organized as a network. So here you can see that we are based in Venice, in Milan, Sassari, and our headquarters are located in Lecce. And our scientific activities are distributed around 9 research divisions that you can see here on the slides. And I mean, we go from ocean modeling to assessing the economic impacts of climate change to design adaptation strategies and so on. So I really invite you to visit our website to learn more about what we do in these different research divisions, and also to learn about the topics we are interested in and we contribute to with our research, which runs from cities, which is the topic of our webinar today, energy, but also global processes like climate negotiations. And of course, and here I conclude this brief introduction, we want to make this knowledge accessible, so we organize a number of dissemination and communication activities, and I think that this webinar is one of the best examples of our commitment in this sense. Very briefly about the rules of the games for this webinar. So Catherine, you will have around 30 minutes for your presentation, and this will be followed by a question and answer session. And the audience, so all the people that are connected are invited to write your questions on the tab that you should see on the right-hand side of the screen, and feel free to do so even when Catherine is speaking. And I will do my best to manage the whole process, because I'm really sure we're going to receive many questions for Catherine. And a very last note, this webinar will be recorded and will be uploaded on the CMCC YouTube page. So if you want to share it with your contacts, feel free to do so. And if you have any question, please don't hesitate to contact us. Now, let's go to the interesting part of this webinar. I leave the floor to you, Catherine. You should have received, yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Elisa.
And thank you again.
I'm just going to check that I'm sharing my right screen. Okay, great. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for that great introduction and for hosting me today. It's really a delight to be part of CMCC's Urban Adaptation webinar series. I have watched some of the past webinars myself and found them really interesting. So hopefully this one will live up to the high standards that have previously been set. As Elisa says, my name is Catherine Higham, and I'm the Regional Manager for CDP's Cities, States and Regions work in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. And so today, to give you a brief agenda, I'm going to introduce you to CDP and our cities programme in a little bit of detail. I'm then going to take you through some of the findings from a report we produced last year on cities at risk, which is really a kind of global snapshot of adaptation actions taken and reported by over 620 cities in 2018. I'm going to take you through a few case studies, and I have to say that although my goal was for this to be quite a global presentation, all of the case studies are from the Europe, Middle East and Africa region, because that is where I work and where I have the most knowledge. And then finally today, I'm going to take you through a few slides that explain how you can get involved either in using and analysing the data that CDP collects from cities around the world, or if you are a representative of a city government or you work closely with a city government, how you can report or start encouraging your city to report your actions and to use the framework that CDP has developed for understanding and monitoring progress against important climate indicators within your city context. So to start with the beginning then, what is CDP and what is our cities programme? And Elisa has already explained a little bit about CDP. As she said, we're a global environmental not-for-profit organisation, and we work with a series of different subnational actors or non-state actors. Real economy actors is also another way of thinking of these important actors who are vital in ensuring that we are able to transition to a climate safe, deforestation free and water secure world, but who are not necessarily parties to international climate change negotiations. And so we think these real economy actors all have a crucial role to play, and that the fundamental basis for them to play that role is that they should have the right knowledge about how their actions and activities contribute to climate change, and also about the risks and hazards that they may be facing as a result of climate change. And so we encourage them first to develop that knowledge, to work within their administrations, within key departments to understand what's happening, and then to start taking action to address both climate impacts and climate risks. We do this through an annual reporting cycle, or one of the ways that we do this is through an annual reporting cycle. As you'll see from this slide, in the City, States and Regions team, that involves a lot of work with partner organisations. So just to take you through what the reporting cycle looks like, we know that cities are, of course, already managing environmental data and using environmental data to drive internal city decision making. We ask cities to provide that data to CDP and to our partners through an annual questionnaire, and I'll talk a bit more about what's included in that questionnaire later. We then manage the data, we make it publicly available on our open data portal, and again I will talk a little bit about the open data portal and how you as listeners to this webinar can access CDP data towards the end of this presentation. We make it available to various partners, including the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, and the C40 Climate Leadership Group. And I'll talk a bit about those partnerships as well. And then we work with cities through research and advocacy, through providing technical assistance, through connecting cities to other actors to support them to gather more data, to gather more relevant data, and to integrate that data into their decision-making processes. And then the cycle starts again. So we call this our annual disclosure cycle. And today I'll be talking about data that was collected through the 2018 and 2019 data cycles. So we have been running our City, States and Regions programme and that annual disclosure cycle that I just talked about since 2011. And as you can see from this slide, our level of participation and engagement that we've seen from cities has radically increased over the past decade. We saw a big jump in the number of cities engaging with our platform and reporting and monitoring and evaluating their climate and environmental data following the signing of the Paris Agreement. And we've seen that continuing to grow. We saw another big increase in the number of cities engaging with CDP and our partners again in 2019, in part as a result of the IPCC's report on special report on 1.5 degrees of warming, and also I think as a result of some of the citizen engagement and citizen action that we saw really ramping up across the world after 2018. Oh, sorry, I've lost my presenter view. There we go, I'm back. So as I said, we saw a real increase in the number of cities engaging with our programme to support them in measuring and managing environmental risks in 2019. And we saw that year over 800 cities disclosing data. Those cities represent over 750 million people and cover approximately 9% of the world's population. And this, of course, is really great news that we can show through our system that so many cities are starting to grapple with and really try and understand their environmental risks and impacts, and to do so in a way that's transparent and allows their data to be used by other stakeholders from across the world. But of course, there's more work to be done to increase that number so that we cover more than 9% of the population. One of the questions that I often get asked when I do presentations like these is how big the 800 or so cities that are reporting their data to CDP are. And we do work, as I said on a previous slide, with the C40 Climate Leadership Group, which is a network of nearly 100 megacities who are committed to demonstrating leadership on climate action. And that group includes many of the world's most famous cities, Tokyo, New York, Paris, London, and so on. However, our programme also includes many cities of under 500,000 inhabitants. And you'll see from this slide that the largest sort of group of cities is cities with between 100,000 and 500,000 inhabitants. And this is really important and something we're quite proud of because last year a study released by the Coalition for Urban Transitions showed that more than 50% of emissions abatement potential in cities comes from cities with a population of less than 500,000 people. So these cities are absolutely crucial to ensuring that we can manage climate change and mitigate emissions. According to the UN, cities of this size are also home to nearly half of the world's population. So again, from an adaptation perspective, which is what we'll be talking about today, it's really crucial that these cities are able to take action to protect their citizens and their residents from the worst impacts of climate change. So I mentioned our partners a few times already, but I do want to just make specific mention of our partnership with ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability. In 2018, CDP and ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability decided to merge two city climate reporting systems that we'd been running in order to make a single unified reporting system that would be easier for cities to use and manage, and would mean that we gathered more data from cities around the world in one place. And so I'm very grateful to our partners at ICLEI for their support in gathering the data that we're going to be talking about in this discussion. The other partner I'd just like to mention in detail before I go into a presentation on the findings of our Cities at Risk report is the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Some of you may be familiar with the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. It is the world's largest alliance of city governments that have come together to take action on this very important agenda, and currently numbers over 10,000 governments from around the world. And CDP provides one of the official reporting platforms for the initiative. As members of the initiative, cities are asked to implement certain key climate actions and to report progress against them. And we're one of the ways that cities are able to do that. So then, to really get into the meat of our presentation, as I said, I'm going to be presenting the findings of a report that we produced last year looking at adaptation data that was reported through our questionnaire in 2018. You can access the full report on our website, and I've included the hyperlink below for those of you who are interested. And I do encourage you to go and have a look. There is, of course, more information than I can provide in a single webinar. Before I take you into the report itself, I thought it would be helpful to give a bit more context on the questionnaire topics and the different indicators that CDP asks cities to collect and consider when trying to understand and manage their environmental risks and impacts. So today we'll be talking about climate hazards and vulnerability and adaptation, and those are of course key for our topics, but we also ask cities to gather data about their citywide emissions. We ask them to report on their emissions reduction strategies, actions and targets. We ask them about development opportunities associated with climate action that they may have identified. And then we ask them for information about certain key indicators on energy, transport, food waste and water security in addition. So for adaptation then, what are the key data points that we look at in the questionnaire? Well, we start by asking cities to consider climate hazards and vulnerability. One of the most important questions in the questionnaire is whether a city has conducted a climate risk and vulnerability assessment, and where cities haven't conducted those, CDP can support by providing case studies, examples and resources to help cities to do so. A good climate risk and vulnerability assessment looks at what hazards a city is facing as a result of climate change, the probability of those hazards occurring, and the likely consequences for the city and for vulnerable populations within the city. Hazards that are both high probability and high consequences are high risk and should then be prioritized for adaptation actions. To complete an effective risk and vulnerability assessment, a city needs access to historical climate data. A city needs an understanding of how climate change may be expected to change the intensity or frequency of past risks, and also data about how past hazards impacted the city so that we can predict what might happen in the future. The city also needs a realistic assessment of its adaptive capacity. What we mean by that is factors, conditions, and local realities that may enable the city to adjust its systems in response to risks. So once the city has completed a climate risk and vulnerability assessment, we then encourage cities to develop adaptation plans and to report on adaptation actions that are being taken to address specific risks and adaptation goals against which progress can be monitored to see, how far cities are getting in terms of the adaptation agenda. So on to the Cities at Risk report then. As I've said, this was an analysis of data reported by over 620 cities in 2018 through the CDP-ICLEI Unified Reporting System. And of the cities that reported that year, 530 cities, representing a combined population of 517 million, reported on climate hazards. The map on this slide shows the cities that reported. The size of the circles relates to the size of the city's population, and the colour represents the intensity of the risk reported. So the darker the circle, the more risks were reported. Grey circles are from cities that didn't report on a sufficient number of risks and hazards to be included in this analysis. And I should note before moving on that all of the data that we've analysed is, data that cities have chosen to report through us. So the fact that a city is showing up as darker and facing more risk may be a sign that the city has actually just a more comprehensive and a more detailed understanding of risks that they are facing, rather than that they are necessarily facing additional risks to their neighbours. So among the hazards that cities reported, and there are a whole host of hazards in our questionnaire, we follow a taxonomy that was developed with C40, the climate leadership group that I talked about before. The most commonly reported hazards by cities around the world were surface floods, rainstorms, heat waves, droughts and extreme hot days. And those may be sort of familiar to some of you who are working in the urban adaptation space. One of the things that we found was really interesting in this analysis is that long-term risks are significantly underreported. So 42% of the risks that cities identified were expected to manifest in the short term, and that's that purple section on the graph that you can see in front of you. The majority of these hazards were reported as medium or high likelihood, and so it's clear that cities are really expecting to feel the full force of climate impacts in the coming years between now and 2025. What is perhaps cause for concern is that it's noticeable that long-term hazards are much less frequently reported. Only 11% of the hazards identified were long-term risks. But 77% of those long-term hazards were reported as posing a serious or extremely serious threat to the city. And so we can tell that cities must brace themselves for substantial, far-reaching climate impacts, and that it's really important that cities do start taking those serious long-term risks into further consideration. We're speculating a bit here, but one reason for the underreporting of long-term risk may be due to scientific uncertainty about how those long-term risks manifest. But that may also be compounded by barriers that cities face with, access to accurate models and accurate data, and also some barriers that cities around the world have reported to understanding and interpreting that data about longer-term risks, which makes it, of course, much harder to integrate those risks into plans and policies. This, though, is where the importance of really comprehensive climate risk and vulnerability assessments becomes kind of ever more important. You'll see from that text on the side here that our analysis shows that cities with climate risks and vulnerability assessments are nearly 3 times as likely to report long-term hazards. And they're also taking many more adaptation actions, almost 6 times more on average, as a result of those risk and vulnerability assessments. So this really is a very crucial step in planning for climate change and ensuring that cities can adapt. So moving on then to some more of the detail that we were able to gather from the analysis that we've produced. We see many cities reporting that climate change poses serious social risks. As you can see from the top line on this graph here, increased risk to already vulnerable populations was the most frequently identified social risk for both the short, medium and long term. We also see cities expressing concern about increased demand for public services as a result of climate risks, increased incidence and prevalence of disease, and impacts on socioeconomic conditions. This then has an impact on the vital public services that cities provide to their citizens. And it's perhaps unsurprising, given the social risks that cities were identifying in the previous slide, that cities have said that the services that they expect to be most impacted by climate change are public health services, with 415 cities reporting short-term concerns about impacts on public health, and that, of course, increasing in the long and medium term. We also see cities expressing concerns about impacts on residential services, water supply and sanitation, transport, environment and emergency management, of course, increasing the demand for emergency management in many instances. So what then are some of the actions that cities are taking to respond to the risks that they have identified? Well, when we look at the top 3 hazards that cities are identifying, so that's floods and rainstorms, extreme heat and drought, we can see that cities are currently much more equipped, or are reporting that they're much better equipped to take action on extreme rain and less well equipped to tackle extreme heat and drought. In line with kind of all of these hazards, cities are taking a mix of actions. But if you look in a little bit more detail about the number of actions reported, we can see that the balance is really tipped towards policy measures. So for floods, we see a lot of flood mapping, we see crisis management, we see community engagement and long-term planning. For extreme heat, we see a lot of heat mapping, we see policies targeting the most vulnerable, and again, we see community engagement ranking as among the most popular actions. And for drought, we also see awareness campaigns, water use restrictions, and promoting water efficiency and community engagement as the most popular actions reported by cities. So while all of these actions are, of course, really important, measures, there does seem to be a bit of over-representation of policy and soft infrastructure solutions compared to hard infrastructure solutions that are being reported by cities, particularly in the area of drought. Again, this is sort of speculating, but one reason for that may be, related to some of the barriers that cities face in financing big infrastructure projects aimed at increasing resilience and allowing the city to adapt to climate change. But of course, still very positive to see some of those measures that are being taken. So I'm going to talk next about a few case studies, and these are mostly from cities that reported data to CDP in 2019. As I've said, this isn't really a global overview. These are all cities from the Europe, Middle East and Africa region. And I've selected them partly because the adaptation actions are interesting, but also partly because you can read more about them if you're interested to do so after the webinar in some of our case studies and other reports. So the first case study that I thought it would be interesting to talk about today is the city of Vitoria-Gasteiz in the Basque region in Spain. Vitoria-Gasteiz was one of our CDP Citys A-list cities last year, and I'll talk a bit about the A-list in due course. It's also a city with a long history of prioritizing environmental action. It's over the past 30 years really prioritized ensuring that all citizens have access to green spaces, and it has a quite innovative network of parks that form a ring around the city, which is referred to often as the Green Belt. In 2012, the city was the European Green Capital as well. Recently, the city has been prioritizing the creation of green space through its urban green infrastructure strategy. And this is primarily in response to the urban heat island effect and in response to anticipated increase in extreme hot days and in heat waves, and also to protect against flooding. The city has identified a risk of increased flooding from the Zadorra River. And so 2020, this year, will see the completion of a big new flood defence on the right bank of the Zadorra River, which will be new green spaces and floodplains, which will capture and filter floodwaters, but which have also been designed with co-benefits in mind for times when the city isn't flooded, including the creation of new walking and cycling routes through the city. So I would encourage you to check out our case study on Vitoria-Gasteiz if you're interested to learn more. And I'll also tell you about how you can access Vitoria-Gasteiz's response to the CDP questionnaire in due course. The second city I wanted to talk about in this section is Bristol City Council. So Bristol City Council has a very innovative and very ambitious integrated adaptation and mitigation strategy called the One City Climate Strategy. The strategy involves a lot of work on urban resilience and prioritizes actions to deal with flood risk as a major priority. So Bristol is on the or close to the mouth of the River Severn, and so faces flood risk from the river and also increased flood risk as a result of sea level rise. And Bristol is trying to address this with both grey and green infrastructure. They have recently, the Cabinet has recently approved a new series of flood defences at the Avonmouth Sevenside enterprise area following the publication of the One City Climate Strategy. And that infrastructure will involve raising existing earth embankments, using glass panels to preserve views and developing new flood walls, but also integrating at least 80 hectares of wetlands to ensure that kind of nature-based solutions and ecosystem restoration have a role in those flood defences that are being developed. And I think an interesting thing to note as well is that this is being done in partnership with Gloucestershire Council, you know, looking at subnational actors working together, and also with the UK Environment Agency, so working with the national government. Another example that I wanted to touch on briefly is some of the work that the city of Tshwane in South Africa is doing. And this is in response to problems caused by solid waste management and challenges for solid waste management within the city. So I think often people think of waste as one of the sectors that needs to be addressed from a climate change mitigation perspective, because we know that untreated waste and unmanaged waste can contribute significantly to cities' greenhouse gas emissions. But urban waste is also solid waste management is also a crucial issue from an adaptation perspective, because we know that poor waste management exacerbates climate risks from floods and storm surges and amplifies threats to water security. Particularly considering the quality of drinking water supplies. So to address both the adaptation and mitigation aspects of solid waste management, the City of Swane has designed an innovative new build, operate and transfer agreement with a company called New GX Enviro. And this company will be developing a new recycling facility on public land called the Atteridgeville Recycling Park, which will be operated for 15 years by New GX Enviro, who's taking on a lot of the risk related to the initial development of the infrastructure before the ownership of the waste management facility reverts to the city at no cost. The facility represents a £16.4 million dollar investment and contains a material recovery facility, garden waste and composting facility, and a construction and demolition waste disposal facility. The goal is that the new unit will serve 300,000 households in the surrounding region and divert waste from landfill, and that it will also contribute jobs to the local economy and develop new sectors as a result. And then the final case study that I wanted to talk about, and I'm conscious of time, so I will try and speed up a little bit, is the city of Umea in Sweden. And the reason I've included this is that this is quite a small action compared to some of the others that I've talked about, but nonetheless quite important. Umea has a population of less than 100,000 people, and they've identified that one of the risks that they're facing as a result of climate change is increased snowfall from increased precipitation. And so they have developed a soft infrastructure solution, which is to publish a prioritized mapping of roads that will be kind of prioritized for winter road clearance, and they're giving priority to pedestrian and bicycle paths where the need is considered to be greatest, and involving stakeholders in the decision making. And some of the co-benefits that they've identified from this action are social inclusion, social justice, improved resource quality, and improved public health as part of their promotion of active travel. So as I said, included that because I think it's a good example of a soft infrastructure or smaller action that can nonetheless have a big impact. So I'll just very quickly run us through the last few slides I have in my deck about how you can get involved with the CDP Cities programme. So the first thing I want to suggest is that hopefully the information I've presented you so far gives you a bit of a taste of the kind of data that we have in our open data portal. And that's all freely accessible on our website. And we do encourage you to go and have a look at that information and to use it for your own research and analyses. You can look at both data sets in Excel format of all the actions reported by cities in relation to certain questions. You can also look at the full response from individual cities by going to our website. You do need to create an account to do that, but you can email us at citiesEMEA@cdp.net if you have any questions about how that could work. Another way I'd encourage you to get involved is to review some of our other reports that we've produced on the basis of the data reported by cities. There's a few here, or one of the ones that might be of interest to some of you is a report we produced in 2019 on how cities are increasingly collaborating with businesses, so with other real economy actors, to enhance their climate action and to develop joint place-based climate roadmaps and shared climate targets. Another way that you can learn a bit more about some of the information that cities are reporting through our system is through our CDP Citys Alist. In 2019, we had about 105 cities representing a combined global population of 170 million people featured in the A-list. And you can learn more about that on our website. And we will be bringing out a 2020 A-list in the coming weeks. So do watch this space for that. In order to get onto the city's A-list, cities need to report a certain number of key leadership actions that they're taking on climate change. So these include demonstrating political commitment from the mayor, they include collaboration with companies, they include having a comprehensive risk and vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan, a comprehensive citywide emissions inventory, and a citywide action plan to reduce emissions, along with emissions reduction targets, renewable energy targets, and a high level of transparency. And we do encourage you to look at the city's A-list and to look at the information reported by those cities to get inspired about new actions that your city could be reporting as well. If you are a representative of a city or you work closely with city officials, then I'd also very much encourage you to start reporting today. Reporting to CDP is absolutely free and voluntary. You can report publicly, and then all of your data will be used in our analyses and provided on the Open Data Portal. Or if you feel that you'd like to begin by reporting privately, you can use our questionnaire and the framework and indicators that it provides to assess your city's level of climate action and report privately to begin with. We have no prescribed methodology, so cities can use a range of different methodologies to develop their risk and vulnerability assessments, their greenhouse gas emissions inventories, and all of them can be reported through our system. And we can also provide support, guidance, and resources throughout. And I will leave this presentation with a quote from one of last year's A-list cities about the benefits of reporting to CDP and how our feedback and analysis can be used to engage internally within city administrations. So this city was among the A-list cities, and they said, thanks to this fact, different issues related to climate change are now easier to attract the attention of our mayor, and they're motivated to do the best again to get the highest score. We also find cities that get the lowest score say that that can be used to get the attention of the mayor and to be used to contribute to arguments that say that more action is needed and more resources are needed on this agenda. So I will stop there and pass back to Elisa in a second. But before I go, please do feel free to contact me. I'm looking forward to the discussion that we're about to have, and will then also be, very happy to answer additional questions by email if you would like to send those. Elisa, maybe back over to you.
Yep. Here I am. Thank you, Catherine, so much for this very interesting presentation. I thank you also for the impressive and inspiring work you guys do at CDP. Thank you. So we open now our question and answer session. I invite all the attendees not to be shy and drop the question in the panel you can see on the right-hand side. We have already received quite a number of questions for you, Catherine. So be ready for that.
Great,
Also,
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, I want to state again that all these questions will be collected and then passed over to Catherine. So even if you have very technical question and very specific curiosity, she can liaise with her colleague if needed. So yeah, feel free to exploit the opportunity to be in touch with her. Maybe I would exploit my role as a moderator to pose you a question from my side, because there's a curiosity I have. In one of the first slides you showed, you were showing a bar chart showing the increasing engagement of cities with CDP. And I also noticed that there was, in orange, I think, an increasing engagement with regions and states too. So I was wondering, what is the work that you're actually doing with this level of governments? Is it substantially different from what you do with cities? Are they also doing a reporting system with you? Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for asking that question. That's a really great opportunity to talk about our states and regions program. So as you say, we have a similar program to the program that we run with cities, with state and regional governments. And that's run in, again, in partnership with several groups, including the Climate Group, who are the Secretariat for the Under 2 Coalition. The Under 2 Coalition is a group of states and regions committed to climate action and to limiting warming to under 2 degrees, hence the name. And we also have a partnership with a group called Regions 4, who are focused on supporting regional governments and state governments to adapt to climate impacts. And again, the work that we do there is quite similar. We collect data through an annual questionnaire from state and regional governments to understand, where are they at on climate action so far, and to, again, as we do with the cities questionnaire, kind of provide that very comprehensive set of indicators so that governments can see kind of what is best practice in terms of what you would be measuring and managing to try and assess your progress on climate action. We produce an annual report on the data that's reported by states and regions. So that will also be coming out for 2020 in the next few weeks, and I encourage you to look out for it. And then again, for state and regional governments, we not only kind of collect the data and provide the framework, but we also provide some kind of resources and capacity building activities with state and regional governments to help them improve the data that they're collecting.
Thanks. We have a question from Federico Montanaro, who's asking about how are you actually dealing with highly populated areas, for example, conurbation, whose governance is highly fragmented in smaller cities. So how do you do the reporting, if you do the reporting in this kind of situations?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. The simple answer is that we try and work with both levels of government. So an example that I can give is we work with both the Greater Manchester Combined Authority in the UK and Manchester City Council, which is one of the urban areas within the metropolitan area of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. We also have done some work to encourage cities and metropolitan authorities, or cities and regional governments, to work together. So last year we held, for example, a workshop with the regional government of Abruzzo and with several cities from the region of Abruzzo who came together to discuss climate action and the different challenges and the different data that they're collecting, because of course, one of the one of the things that's so important, we know that all of these real economy actors and these subnational governments need to be taking action themselves on climate change. We also know that there are some things that they can't do without support of the national government. And so kind of creating the data frameworks to easily transmit information between different levels of government so that it can be taken into account by each level in their policy and planning processes is really important. So in terms of what that means for our open data portal, it does mean, and there's a note on this in the system, that you may see you know, data from Greater Manchester and data from the City of Manchester, and there will be some overlap. So we do ask, you know, researchers and others who are using the data to kind of be cognizant of that when they're looking at things, and not just to, you know, tot up the total emissions if you're looking for aggregated emissions, but do a bit more digging. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure whether it is only my problem, but I don't see you on my screen. If you could check if your webcam is still on. And in the meantime, I will pose you another question. You're back again, thanks.
Sorry about that. I tried to minimize myself so I could see you, but I evidently stopped it for everybody.
No problem. So the other question is about, one of the many other questions that we received is about the source of funding for climate change action. So from the data you collect, do you have an idea of where these funds for adaptation come from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's not something that we have included in the Cities at Risk report in great detail, but we do have a section of the questionnaire, which I mentioned, which is called Opportunities, which looks for kind of development opportunities connected to climate action and climate planning. And what we see there, or what we ask there, is we ask cities to report both adaptation and mitigation actions or projects that they might be planning, and to report, you know, what are the costs of those actions, what is the status of those actions, what funding they may already have and what the sources of funding are, but also where they may be seeking additional sources of funding. This year, we've also asked cities, you know, whether they're receiving any support from multilateral development banks as a first start, and a very very recent analysis on a small number of cities, I think about 35 or so cities from within the EMEA region only, concluded that only about 23% of the cities are currently receiving access to funding or have currently received any funding from multilateral development banks. And that sort of section of the questionnaire, that data that we collect on opportunities, on costs of climate action, on you know, the status of financing, has been used in a number of recent analyses to inform kind of plans that international organizations are developing to address what's often called the city climate finance gap, right? You know, we know that we need a huge amount of action from cities to adapt to climate change. We know that's going to be really costly. But we know that there's sort of limits to the conventional sources of financing that can be used by city governments who have, you know, developed their climate action plan and are now looking to implement it. And so recently, analysis of the data that's reported through that opportunities section of the questionnaire has been used by the Green Climate Fund, for example, who've been looking at what they can do to work more closely with city governments. It's also, I think, been used in the development of a recently announced initiative by the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is the City Climate Gap Fund that was launched at New York Climate Week a couple of weeks ago, and which is again really focused on providing sort of support to cities to prepare projects through initial stages, and then to find additional financing, whether that's private sector financing or public sector financing, to support their action. So I recommend that you check that out if you haven't already seen the recent announcement of that initiative as well.
Thanks. I also think these answers to one of the other questions we received about whether this disclosure by city actually supports them in attracting more climate finance. And probably, I mean, we can't make a bold statement and find a really strong correlation, but from what you're saying, it looks like it helps at least to bridge somehow this gap, or to put together or connect actors that can work together in this sense.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. So I think, you know, as I've said, there's definite indirect benefits in terms of connecting to financing opportunities, because so many people are using this public data set to understand what cities' needs are. We also run a program called Matchmaker, which is sort of currently being piloted in North America primarily, which is working with cities to try and increase capacity to access different innovative financing mechanisms, particularly harnessing kind of private financing mechanisms, and kind of looking at whether we can connect cities with, you know, investors and others that are interested in financing urban adaptation projects and infrastructure. And the other thing I would say about reporting and disclosure and kind of finance is, and this is again something that's very difficult to, you know, I don't have a statistic that proves this, but I think if, you know, if a city has a really rigorous assessment of their risk and vulnerability, and has planned a series of, you know, strategic, well-crafted adaptation actions to respond to risks and vulnerabilities on the ground, and has also developed an important kind of set of KPIs to track progress to addressing those risks, then, you know, the city is quite far along the road to having quite a lot of the data that might be requested by an institution looking to fund projects on adaptation. So I think having that data and showing that you've done that kind of rigorous work in developing your plans is going to be an asset when you then later come to seeking project finance. It's not doing the whole job for you or anything like that, but it's definitely an asset going forwards into the future.
Thanks. So I will ask you a final question that tries to put together at least 5 or 6 questions we received. I hope I will make justice to them. But basically, you know, your reporting system is based on a bottom-up approach, let's say, where cities just provide the data in the form they want, and the type of data they want, and so on. So many people here in the question chat are asking about, for example, issues of comparability, or the fact that, you know, there was a map you were showing where cities in Africa were looking less at risk than cities in Europe, for example, about the transparency of the data you receive. So are you also thinking about doing an exercise in terms of harmonizing the type of data you receive, or maybe you don't think this is the case, that it should be just a bottom-up approach to that?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and in particular, you know, the detail about that map. I do encourage whoever it was who asked that question, I do encourage you to go and look at the sort of explanation about how we develop those hazard scores, because as I said, it absolutely is the case that some of those cities, it may not be that they're actually facing more risks, it may be that they're just more advanced in reporting those risks and understanding those risks. In terms of ways to be able to aggregate the data, although we are very flexible in terms of how we say cities, you know, should collect the data, and the methodology that cities might use to conduct a climate risk and vulnerability assessment, we wouldn't be prescriptive about that. We would say, use the one that's most suitable to your city. The framework that our questionnaire provides is developed with a goal to kind of comparability and interoperability between what is then reported. So obviously, we are relying on cities to report the data that they have, and in some cases, cities don't have the data infrastructure in place yet to be able to report really really developed and concrete data. But nonetheless, where we have developed kind of particular indicators and particular structures within the questionnaire, we are trying to make it as cross-comparable as possible. So it's a compromise, I would say, of course. And we're actually, currently looking at that in terms of some of our plans for future development of the questionnaire as well.
Fantastic. So I'm really sorry I didn't manage to pose you all the questions we received, but I will forward them to you. So, you can keep in touch with the people that followed our seminar today. I would kindly ask you, Catherine, to put on our last slide before, if you don't mind. Well, first of all, I really want to thank you again for being with us today and for providing such an excellent overview of what you do at CDP. Thank you for that, and we're really looking forward to collaborate with you more in the future. If possible, I thank all the people that joined us today. You were really a lot, and we're really happy that you stay with us and you enjoy the webinar. I will close this session by reminding you that tomorrow we have another exciting webinar, which is about the use and non-use value of nature and the social cost of carbon. And it's going to be at 3 p.m. Central European time, if you want to join us. And I think that's all from my side. Thank you again, Catherine. Thanks to all the people connected, and looking forward to virtually meet you soon. Thank you.
Great.
Well,
thank you so much for the invitation and for the opportunity to present. And as I said, please do email me any questions that you have about CDP and our work, and I'll look forward to receiving those other questions from you, Elisa.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thanks.